Alright, it's time to do it again, to do that voodoo we do so well Friday night. Happy to be back with you. As always, we should be live now as soon as I see a tweet or a retweet or a link or anything of that ilk. I will be sure to send it back out, though that's a somewhat spurious announcement that will do very little to help anyone who isn't here already, for they would not have heard me. Yeah, this like kinda sucks. I'm hoping for news. Obviously, you know, the whole Greg Monroe, Jared Allen thing. People pivoting not as quickly as they probably should, with some decent value for us. I think there's a better chance that people miss playing this slate because baseball locks almost concurrently, so a lot of the volume users are giving secondary attention to their round ball lineups. Yeah, I'm hesitantly optimistic that this goes well should we happen to get any news. Embiid doubtful for the next game. The biggest reason that it was a big win there for Philadelphia to take that game down is that they can now, really consider just sitting Embiid down for the series. Like, they got to win, 2 out of 4, and they'll get a couple of them at home. So give that guy 10 days off until we get to the second round of the series. It wouldn't be surprising to me unless he, walks into the trainer's room and goes, I feel 100%, my knee doesn't hurt at all, that they just sit him down for the duration, which I think would be best. I think we're good there. Alright, I think that's a link. So let's take a peek. Hey, it's me. That hair is feathered, and it is lethal. Do. Yep, there it is. Everyone's like, where are you, kids? I'm responding to like the 7 people personally who are like, where are you? So if we were to see news, it would not surprise me if Aaron Baines was out. This unfortunately doesn't do a metric ton for us, but I liked him a lot game 1 and game 2, and he was disappointing. Did not do nearly as well as I hoped, but game 2 played 11 minutes in the first half, and had 11 or 12 fantasy points, came in the second half, played like 2.5 minutes, turned his ankle a little bit, and never returned. Because the 2 primary accounts, because he didn't actually go to the locker room, he just went to the bench, but they wrapped it and threw some ice on it. But it didn't get largely reported. And basically anywhere you look today, they're just like, yeah, Aaron Baines only played 15 minutes in game 2. Well, that was because he got hurt. Didn't show up on the injury report, but that's, especially with the day before, is not necessarily super evident. That's the 8:30 game, but I'm not shocked if we see Aaron Baines is questionable sometime soon. Now, unfortunately, that news doesn't do a ton for us. If you look what happened, you got more Daniel Tice, who would be interesting at low ownership, and a guy who does have a good, point per minute ceiling. Horford's minutes would stretch out. One of the ways you knew that Baines was really hurt, besides the fact that he played, 11.5 minutes in the first half and 2 minutes in the second half, was the fact that Horford, who they'd played much less in the first half, ended up playing the majority of the second half because that game was close and ended with 37 minutes when he was sick. Remember, that was the game where Horford was questionable. So, not sure everyone is keeping the best tabs there. And again, paying attention is always going to help you out as we get further into the postseason. Any little tidbits that you can get from the news or the Twitter or from just about any other source is potentially very, very useful. And again, especially with MLB lock being roughly concurrent with NBA lock tonight. If something does come out, and more so than you would in the regular season, I would pivot. A lot of people are a little more on autopilot. So let's say a good example would be in the regular season, if Embiid is out and they say Greg Monroe is starting at whatever they said, I think it was about 8-9 minutes before lock, he'd have gotten up to 35-40% ownership. On the show, I guessed he would get to 24, and he got to 18 and was one of the best value plays on the day. So if there's a similar situation, I would over pivot, as opposed to normally during the regular season, I tend to be a little dubious because frequently people have, the good value that they're looking at all day and the good plays they're looking at all day, and then the hot new thing comes out at 6:45 and people over jump, where you end up seeing, Greg Monroe in that situation 61% owned as opposed to something like that. So to talk about the slate from a sort of a stand back bit, I am, as everyone I think should be, a giant fan of the third game this evening. Obviously, just looking at the over-unders, the last game is by far the best paced. Being specific, let me refresh this and get the most recent numbers. We've got the first game at a 210 over-under, the second game at 204, and the third game at 221. But it is basically, and we're going to obviously go through this player by player, the guys in the first two games aren't priced down enough in most cases, and again, this varies player to player and site to site, where they are worth spending up on purchasing, buying, owning, rostering, as opposed to taking guys from the last game, which is just a much better DFS environment. So there are days that I feel more like cherry picking from the bad games. Today is a day where I'm really not super excited about trying to stack, the two earlier games. We've seen those are really two games that can turn into shit a lot easier. And again, OKC is pretty significantly projected to score the most points on this slate, and followed by that is Portland. Although they're basically tied with Toronto, I think, actually. I could go back and look. But point being, those are the guys we like. Of the four teams looking at the first two games, certainly the one I'd be most interested in would be Toronto, where I am least confident, I think, in this point in the Magic defense compared with the other three teams we're talking about. When you talk about the Celtics and the Pacers and the Magic and the Raptors, these are all well above average defenses. You could rank all of them in the top 10 pretty easily. So, trying to get a signature performance here, I think ends up being most likely out of the guys in Toronto, out of those four teams, and especially on DraftKings, they're sort of priced to move to get that done. I think Kyle Lowry continues to be aggressive. Read a lot about the difference between the first game and the second game and things that were said to him by the coach and from Danny Green and from other people, and the effect on his postseason play and Kawhi's ensuing free agency and all that. But point being, game one he was remarkably passive, and a number of people extolled upon him to, really step up and get something done. And clearly the team looked a hell of a lot better when he did, so would be strange to see him go back in the shell again. I'm not super thrilled with it because of the fact that he is still out there playing next to Kawhi, which has limited him the entire year. Counting game two where he was good playing next to Kawhi, they've played 58 games next to each other, and Lowry has put up a good score that you wanted in a tournament like 5 times. I mean, it has been the exception. Plus, I assume his ownership will be reasonably significant. What's really interesting tonight is there is a real paucity, a real lack of really any sort of decent value. One of the reasons that, even though this is a nightmare matchup for Darren Collison, is the fact that if he gets you 20 for his 4,500, and I have him projected for 23, by the way, he's been really bad all year in this matchup. 4 games in the regular season, 2 games in the postseason. It's a real thing there. But I liked him at $5,000 last slate. Now he's, especially on FanDuel, where he's $4,500, so it's droppable. Obviously, getting away from him is a way to get away from Super Chalk. On FanDuel, we have him projected at 62% ownership. I think that may be low. But yesterday, I was a big fan of Simmons Curry at point guard because I expected on FanDuel a lot of people to go for some of the value options there. It ended up being the Durant game and not the Curry game. And Curry, they blew them out, and Curry was in massive foul trouble. So Curry played fine. He had a fantasy point and a half a minute or whatever, but didn't get the time and didn't put up the score. But I think the concept was still good. So if you have Westbrook and Lillard, or Lillard and Irving, or Irving and Westbrook, or anything like that, I do think that while you are getting rid of one of the few tolerable value plays that we have on the entire slate, you probably more than make up from it in unique construction. And again, this is a real shit spot for Darren Collison. So it makes sense to play Darren Collison. He is objectively the best value on the board. He really is. On FanDuel pretty easily. But that still doesn't mean that it's worth it to not have a much more distinctive and unique lineup. And obviously, if Darren Collison is going to, let's say Darren Collison is at 62% ownership. Okay, so 38% of people won't have a double spend up. And then if you take 2 spend up options, and we like Westbrook, we like Irving, we like Lillard, all those guys obviously have a big ceiling. Just taking those 2 spend up point guards, you've now maximized the number of people possibly playing your lineup to be a much smaller figure, and that should factor into your calculus here a little bit. The Raptors are starting who we thought they were, so let me, I think I've retweeted and sent and everything, so let's get in here and talk player by player a little bit, talk about this first game series. Obviously, moving to Orlando. Orlando took game 1. Toronto came back and again had a very strong game 2, took that game down. Kawhi Leonard on DK at $8,200 is obviously a super strong play. We saw his ceiling last game. The floor is much more solid than a lot of guys. Again, DraftKings, everyone is priced better, so it's a little strange to look at that. But right now we have Kawhi Leonard as our 7th most owned player at 30% ownership. And again, if you subscribe to Awesemo.com, which we'd like you to do after if you watch the show, then you have a big day. People ask me all the time, do you take tips? And my 2 answers are no. Here's a good charity you can donate to, or 2, subscribe, because that's the way the thing is supposed to work. I have had, 20 people over the postseason say, like, hey, why don't you charge for this show? There's basically kind of 2 business models you go with. One is you charge for the show and that's your source of income. Sure. The other one is you don't charge for the show and people watch the show, and by that they then come to subscribe. So previous places I've worked, we charged for the shows, and you had this many subscribers the whole year, and you brought in money, and it works great. But here we're obviously going with Model B, which is why at the start of the year we had 500 people watching, then 800, then 1,000, then 1,200, then 1,500, then 2,000 by the end of the year. So, and the subscribers went up the whole year. So it seems like they've made the right decision. Again, that's over my pay grade, but just to answer a frequent question I get. So let's. I'm actually going to step back and talk about value a little bit. Looking at the plays on DraftKings, usually you have some sort of value. We'll say value is something under 4,000. The most owned player we have under $4,000 is Wesley Matthews at 13%, and he is I'm eyeballing it, 22nd most owned player. There isn't any good value. So, this leads to some interesting questions. I think, by the way, for reference, I probably prefer Rodney Hood. Rodney Hood has been terrible. But he's getting like 23, 25 minutes. Now, he's literally scored, I believe, single-digit fantasy points in the first 2 games of the series. He's been awful. But better matchup, game environment, few minutes less than Wes Matthews, and lower ownership. I would probably run Rodney Hood out there in the single lineup where I'm trying to get value before I run Wes Matthews out there. I don't like playing him. I don't like playing Wes Matthews. It's 60 whatever the hell goddamn ownership. I don't like playing Darren Collison. But with the lack of value, running value out there at all is not chalky. If you play Nerlens Noel, or if you play Zach Collins and think that game goes that way, and Canner's hand flares up. If you play Aaron Baines, these guys are all unowned. If you play Corey Joseph, if you play Tyreek Evans is a little over 4K or 4K, but those are unique lineups. Stars and Scrubs is really not unique. On DK, you're going to see a lot of Paul George and Kawhi and Lillard and Irving. So you're going to have underowned guys like Russell Westbrook and Paul George. I like Paul George more than Russell Westbrook again today. It's third game of the series. First game I said I'd rather play Paul George. Paul George was better. I think he had like a fantasy point less. Second game I said I prefer Paul George. Paul George was better points per dollar with like 5 fantasy points less, I think. But Paul George has been right twice in a row, and certainly with the correlation of value, he's a better play by any point per dollar metric. We currently have Russell Westbrook for 41% on DK. I don't think we get that high. Now, I like playing Russell Westbrook tonight if we can come up with any value, because news breaks, if I think there is a real chance you get a Kevin Durant-esque, my ego is deflating, I just got to go out and remind people who the hell I am, and I'm back home, I'm going to put my thing down, type deal out of Russell Westbrook. Wouldn't surprise me at all. So I like getting to Russell Westbrook for that reason. But the price, the positionality on FanDuel, and again, you're not just playing Russell Westbrook over Paul George. You're playing Russell Westbrook and someone else who costs $1,500 less or what have you over Paul George and someone who costs $1,500 more. And let me tell you, when you move from $5,000 to $3,500 tonight, you're sacrificing a lot. So, and this sort of goes back to a corollary about what we were talking about a little while ago. I really hope a piece of value opens up at 640 and we can cram the shit of it in there and go like, oh, okay, now we got, like, if they tell you Baines is starting again, it's going to be hard for me not to like him in this environment. He's been dreadful. He only played 15 minutes last game. No one's going to want to roster him for that reason, but I despite the fact it hasn't happened yet, I really think, 25 minutes, 29 fantasy points wouldn't shock me, and he would be at like 5%, maybe the best play on the evening, because again, there's no goddamn value, and he would open up other things that are hard to get to. So looking at the Raptors, the best sort of in a points per dollar / position-y sense on FanDuel, which is kind of ugly, is probably Pascal Siakam. They're all uglier on FanDuel than they are on DK. They're much harder to get to. Marc Gasol is $700 more. Pascal Siakam's $1,200 more. Kawhi Leonard is $1,500 more. Kyle Lowry is $1,000 more. But I slightly prefer playing Pascal Siakam also due to the scoring on FanDuel to Lowry. But ranking them on FanDuel for me is probably pretty barely Siakam, Lowry, Leonard. DK, I do think Leonard at $8,200 is the hardest to get away from. Then probably Lowry, then probably Pascal and DK for me. But on both sites, you're talking about on a ranking my attractiveness on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 6 and a 6.2 and a 6.4. They're all pretty damn similar to me, and it's tough to tell who's going to have the game here. I've watched each of the first 2 games twice. I've watched each of the games that happened during the series at least once, if not twice. There's nothing that relative to these salaries makes them stand out a ton. Pascal Siakam, especially at 7,300, is really safe. Kawhi Leonard at 8,200 is all very nearly as safe, a little more likely to disappear, minutes a little more spurious. But I would be surprised if one of these guys didn't have a pretty solid game. I don't think in generally I'm going to want to going into Orlando, but if I'm building up my lineup tonight, and again, most of the lineups I've tinkered with tend to have about a guy from each of the early 4 teams, maybe 0, rarely 2, and then 4 or 5 guys from the last game tends to be best. So looking at this game, Marc Gasol can be your guy on either site. 6,200 on FanDuel. There's a lot of interesting mid-price center options when you talk Steven Adams, who probably ends up being my favorite of them. He feels pretty safe to me. I like this spot for him. I think he averages like 33 fantasy points every time he plays. He's still just a little bit underpriced for that, and there is 45 upside for him here. So I think, relative to salary, ownership, everything, Adams ends up being my favorite of these mid-priced options, but not vastly more so than Marc Gasol and Cantor, who has come down a little bit. I probably prefer Adams most in cash. I might prefer Cantor a little bit in tournaments. He has been under-owned this entire Portland run, with the exception of the first day, which was one of the only 2 days he disappointed. He came out and he was playing against the Hawks and was like, oh shit, he might have some trouble in the next couple of weeks when he plays these good centers, but he's going to go off and crush face, which was what I thought, among other people. Yeah, that's not really how it worked. He kind of sucked on the first night, which was a really good spot. Kind of sucked on the second night, which was a really good spot, and then has been good 9 of the 10 games since then. So he's just never quite owned as much as he should be. There's still a giant upside in tournaments. I like him for that reason. Anyone who was good in Game 1 and not good in Game 2, I'm going to have a little more appeal of tonight. So I like Marcus Morris for that reason. 5,100, 4,700, not as cheap as he was. People will be off him because of that. Dreadful in Game 2. People will be off him because of that. It was not last game, but the game before that, in which he was pretty good. Okay, so I like that. Dennis Schroeder. Terrible Game 2. One of my favorite plays in Game 2. I didn't think he'd be owned enough. He wasn't owned enough, but apparently everyone knew something I didn't. Went from playing 36 minutes to 21 minutes and had 11 fantasy points. Terrible. But guess what? The game before that, he crushed and played 36 minutes. That could happen again, especially on FanDuel, where, again, value is shit. And he's $5,000 on the nose. I'm a pretty big fan there of playing Paul George and Dennis Schroeder, and, God forbid Russ Westbrook turns an ankle or just has an uninspiring game again, or they go back to more Schroeder than Terrence Ferguson, which was basically the toggle between Games 1 and Game 2. Game 1, they played just a ton of Schroeder. And Ferguson played, a dozen minutes. Game 2, they split it basically evenly, and Schroeder played like shit. So, anytime we're talking about any of the guys who were really, really solid Game 1 and then shit Game 2 will not be owned as much as they should be, because as everyone who's ever looked at this seriously has noted, people overreact to recency. There is value to the last game. It is generally overreacted to. If you were, omniscient, you would look at the last game and it is worth this much, and people just give it this much credence. It has been that way as long as this thing has been a thing. This thing we do. Looking at Orlando, I'm still not going back to DJ Augustine. I think you got that game. I don't think it's likely you get that game again, and 40 is the ceiling. Kyle Lowry can give you 60. That can happen. DJ Augustine, 40, you're getting towards the ceiling there. And again, that price still not appealing. He's $6,000 still on FanDuel, $5,500 on DK. I would rather play Evan Fournier for $100 less on DK and $900 less on FanDuel. Don't particularly like the spot for him. They're really balancing out the offense, trying to get something to work here. Everybody's basically taking a dozen shots a game. Fournier on FanDuel, $5,100. If you have an allergy to Dennis Schroeder, play Fournier instead for $100 more. I think that's just fine. I like John Isaac quite a bit. I don't know if he plays 26 or 34 minutes, but has a ceiling we really haven't seen in this series. 5,100 on FanDuel, where you get 3 for a steal and a block, which, again, he can pick up a half dozen of those. 4,600 on DK, same price as Darren Collison. I'd probably in one lineup try to play him instead. The guy I feel safest about here is probably Aaron Gordon. He's going to play his 33, 34 minutes. He got, I think, 32 and 35 fantasy points the first 2 games. 6,700 on FanDuel is really not unreasonably priced. $6,200 on DK is really not unreasonably priced. I assume the highest owned of the players on this team. I will look. Nope, we have Vooch higher at 7,800. We have Isaac higher at 4,600. I would slightly rather play Aaron Gordon than those 2 players. I do think, having watched the games, and I'd be interested if anyone disagrees with me, that Vooch's struggles are real. Marc Gasol has lost a lateral step and a bit of speed. So Marc Gasol isn't anywhere near Defensive Player of the Year Marc Gasol anymore, because when he runs out there against Clint Capella or James Harden or any number of guys, he really does struggle. That is a problem for him. In those matchups, he's just worse defensively than, say, Serge Ibaka and a number of other guys, or Pascal at center or other things. Against a guy like Vooch, who doesn't have, the quickness, who instead has strong post moves and other stuff, he's still a really, really good defender, and they've been doubling Vooch a fair amount. So, I do think the struggle there is real. Now, obviously, Vooch, was up near, $10K even on DraftKings. $7,800 is cheap. I'm not going to criticize anyone for playing Vooch. I do think he will generally be better than he's been, but I have him projected for 37 fantasy points. Even at $7,800, that is not making my socks roll up and down. I have him projected for 6 more fantasy points than Aaron Gordon, and you are saving $2,000 on FanDuel and $1,600 on DK for Aaron Gordon, and apparently as well lower owned. So I do think the struggle there is real. Is really what it comes down to. If you think, the struggle isn't real, if you have a different interpretation than mine, and I really try to explain myself, like, this is why, I'm worried about this guy. Yesterday, I talked about Derek White, who I wasn't super on. I was fine with him on DK. I said FanDuel, I'd much rather run Spencer Dinwiddie, but DK, you had him at $4,900 and LeVert was $100 more. That was a lot closer for me. But I really try to talk about it for 5 minutes. So here's the reasons I feel. If you disagree with any of my information theories, how I'm coming up with it, so that you can go somewhere else. Because I try to really know what I'm talking about, but I'm gonna be wrong. I'm one dude. I generally assume, when I disagree with Alex Baker-Osmo, I generally assume he's right. He's a really, really smart guy. He's gonna be right at least half the time when we disagree. When I disagree with Vegas, I usually assume Vegas is right. I'm one hopefully pretty smart dude. There are a couple thousand pretty smart dudes and a couple thousand computers, and they're probably right. So that's why I really talk quite so much about all this stuff, in that, hopefully if my rationale doesn't jive with you, if you think, oh, he's just wrong, then you can go your own way. But for those reasons, I would rather play Gordon than Vooch, especially if he's going to be less owned. So, FanDuel, my level of appeal, and Terrence Ross is always going to be just fine in tournaments. Obviously, the ceiling is there. We got some fire Ross recently. That can certainly happen again. He's priced pretty advantageously. So, FanDuel tournaments, probably my order of preference would be Gordon, Ross, Isaac, Fournier. On DraftKings, it would probably be Gordon, Isaac, Ross, Vooch, Fournier, Augustine. I think is how I would order those guys out. Thanks. Okay, so let's move on to another game, just in case something happens here. Really be interested to see a Celtics lineup. Because, if Aaron Baines is going to start again, I really think he deserves consideration, and it's pretty annoying because I've liked him the first game he was shit, and the second game and he was shit, and that whole definition of insanity thing. But again, the value is just non-existent, and he had 2 very good games against the Pacers in, I think they were late March and early April. They were not years ago, and they weren't resting the teams, and it wasn't any bullshit. So if he is starting, which, again, in theory is going to come out right about when this slate locks, 4,000 on FanDuel, 3,800 on DK, that's pretty exciting for me on a slate with absolutely no value. So yeah, Kyrie is great. I suspect he'll be a little more highly owned than I like to, because of the provenance, the recency, all of that. I would probably slightly rather play Damian Lillard even at his prices in a tournament. It's basically a toss-up. I have no issue with either of those guys, but I suspect the ownership drops onto Irving a little more than I'm comfortable with, and I was a huge fan of his before Game 2. Yeah. Why is Collison 60% owned projected? Because he's at a reasonable projection for him. Will have him somewhere in the low 20s to mid 20s in points. He's really, really cheap. He's probably going to still play 30, 32 minutes. He's returning back home. If you think he gets 25 fantasy points for 4,500 tonight, that's the best projected guy under $5,000 probably on almost any reasonable projection system, and that's gonna push him in there. If you want to play even the Paul Georges at 87 and Kawhi Leonard's at 82 and Nick Vucevic at 78, if you even want to try those guys, you're gonna need some guys who cost, less than 5.5, less than 5. That's why he's out of control. So yeah, let's do Pacers and Celtics. I get playing Jaylen Brown on FanDuel. He's droppable there. Go ahead. There's very rare times on a 3-game slate that someone's going to cost $4,400 project to play, 25 or 30 minutes on FanDuel, and I'm going to be like, no, don't go there. So, sure, you can do that. It is a really bad matchup. I don't like him starting. We've been through this. There was Chalk Jaylen Brown Day, and congratulations to everyone here who made a pile of money on Chalk Jaylen Brown Day by not playing Jaylen Brown. But today's a different day, and there's been better options the other 2 times he played. So DK $4,800. I'm gonna find something else to do. Play John Isaac. Play something else. Like I have Jaylen Brown projected for 18.25 fantasy points. That obviously is not a super exciting number. I'm not super interested in going back to Jason Tatum, even after liking him a lot. Game 2, Kyrie and Tatum and Baines were my guys on the Celtics in Game 2. And he took himself a pile of shots, many more so than he usually does. 20 shots plus out of him is an abnormality. That does not frequently come out of Jason Tatum. The numbers have now come up a little bit. If I'm spending, mid-priced money, there's just guys I would like a little more. Of course, he's not out of play on a 3-game slate, but again, when there isn't a lot of news and a lot of actionable information, the only way you can be better at DFS than other people is zigging when they zag. So everyone's going this way, you kind of got to go over this way. We got the Tatum day, and he was cheaper, and now he's going to be more owned than he was on that game. And now he's, on the road, and there was a little extra time there, and Horford was less active than normal because he was sick, and there was time freed up by Baines, and there's just a number of things that cookie it back. It's not like it's a dreadful play, but again, I would zig when other people are zagging in this case. I like Terry Rozier still on FanDuel at $3,900. You probably need some bullshit for it to go great, but got some time next to Kyrie, got some extra time in Game 2. They said they were going to do that. And again, you'll get 6% $3,900 Terry Rozier as opposed to 65%. Thoughts on MCW? Yeah, not a guy I want to take against the Raptors getting his 18 minutes, but again, the value is shit. So I don't know his ownership offhand. I'm guessing he's in the 10% range, and that's about where he should be. We have him right now at 2% on DK, so I like him quite a bit at that number. He is a very good fantasy basketball player. He's not a very good basketball player for a Rookie of the Year. And I mean that obviously by NBA standards. He's a phenomenal basketball player by any human standard, but compared to other NBA players, there's a lot of problems with his game. Thoughts on Khem Birch on DK and GPPs? Yeah, he was, I ranked him, which means I think he's playable. Is basically what it comes into. If you look at my ranks again, available for members, D basically means... So the list I put up every day is a player pool. This is everyone who comes in on the list, and there were 56 players today, are the guys I would have at least one share of if I was mass multi-entering. And then in GPPs, guys are ranked A, B, C, or D. D basically means I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 shares. C means so on and so forth. I like Khem Birch. $3,200 I think is the tag today. Again, I think Vooch's struggles are real. You can hope for a blowout. Like, is he brilliant? No, but again, the value is complete and utter shit. I would rather play Rodney Hood. I would rather play a couple other guys, but you can certainly play Khem Birch. Doesn't bother me whatsoever. How many players would you have from the first game if you're making one lineup on DK? I made one tournament lineup on DK. I imagine it has 2 players from the first game. That has been... most of the lineups I built today had... it has... the first lineup I built on DraftKings has 2 Trailblazers, 3 Thunder, 1 Raptor, 1 Celtic, 1 Pacer, and no one on the Magic. So I ended up with 3 guys from the first 2 games and 5 guys from the last game in there. And that feels best to me. No reason to force it, but, in a single lineup, that makes the most sense. If you're building 150 lineups, it's an entirely different ball of wax, and doing it correctly on a 3-game slate, unless you really want to go all in on one strategy for some reason, you should have some shit stacking the first game, some shit stacking the second game, and obviously plenty stacking the third game. That's just the smarter way to run it. Let's get back to what we were talking about, which is The Celtics and Pacers. So yeah, I like Horford. I don't mind Horford on FanDuel. The steal block thing is a possibility. $6,400 on DK where he's forward eligible. Fine. I would generally rather pay up to $300 from Tatum at forward and get to Horford at this point. $6,700 on FanDuel. Fine. Again, I'm concerned about Baines' health, and we just saw with Baines' health, even though he was sick, they put Horford out there for 37 minutes. 37 minutes is pretty exciting. He can get 2 steals and 2 blocks and then throw up his standard 15 and 8, and you end up with 44 fantasy points out of Horford on FanDuel. So I like Horford either place. Again, I probably slightly prefer Canner in tournaments, slightly prefer Adams in cash, slightly prefer Adams in tournaments too, but I would certainly be exposed to Al Horford and his dreamy eyes. If we get news Baines is starting again, I would have a ton of interest in tournaments. And Marcus Morris, again, showed you in Game 1 he can get 30 here. And $5,100 is not that much more than, say, $4,600 for Darren Collison here under the sermon. Although I guess it's $51 and $45 or $47 is the price for Marcus Morris on DK. So he's $100 more than Darren Collison. If Marcus Morris is 5% owned and Darren Collison is 55% owned, he's going to outscore Darren Collison more than 1 out of every 11 games. And yeah, I guess I'm just saying come in under the field on Darren Collison. I like him objectively. Points per dollar, he does rank out as the best of these 4X guys for me. But not so much so that the other should be 10% and he should be 60. But in full disclosure, and as the most popular play on the day, so I guess you throw the time at it. Yeah, he's been real shit in this matchup some 6 times in a row. But he doesn't need to have a good game to have a good fantasy game. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to be really surprised if Darren Collison goes out there today and does his Kevin Durant and puts his thing down and does his Derek White and does it. That's going to surprise me. But he doesn't need to do that. He can get a block and 3 steals and double-digit assists and 11 points, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I scored 41 fantasy points. Like, Darren Collison has good fantasy days in bad matchups. Towards the end of the regular season, around the beginning of April, they played the Thunder. And he's been very bad against Westbrook many times in a row. And I watched that game, and he wasn't good. But he ended up with, like, 46 fantasy points. Just because shit randomly falls in your lap. You just sometimes get lucky especially when you're the point guard. Like, if Bojan has a great game, that usually helps Darren Collison. It didn't last time, by the way, so it's funny that exact example did not happen when they just played last game. But, Wesley Matthews very much in play again. I'd probably rather play him than Darren Collison in one lineup because Wesley Matthews will be 1/5 his owned and will outscore Darren Collison more than every 5th game. It has to be getting boring. I like Bojan at 6,500 and 6,000. There still really is an upside beyond that. Getting 40 out of him doesn't surprise me here. Especially on FanDuel at 6,500, which is a better price than 6,000 on DK. I still like Bojan. He's probably my favorite guy on this team. Miles Turner is great in tournaments. He's priced better on FanDuel than he is on DK, 6,100 versus 5,700, especially when you take into account the fact that you get 3 per block on FanDuel. If you get the Miles Turner game, it's going to come on the back of 5 blocks. I would still rather Turner than Sabonis. You certainly can Sabonis. Again, Game 1 was decent. Game 2 was an absolute pile of shit. I don't like him at $5,800, but again, he is a guy who can just carry a big ceiling. So I would rather Turner. I don't think Turner will be so owned that I need to go even lower ownership and try to Sabonis in there. But Sabonis has enough of an upside that getting him at his 3% owned doesn't bother me. I probably come in under on Thad today. I like Thad a lot. Liked Thad before Game 1. Was the highest scoring dude on his team. Liked Thad a lot before Game 2. Was the second highest scoring guy on his team. Bojan got him in Game 2. But he had, I want to say, 5 stocks in Game 1 and 4 stocks in Game 2. And he's a guy who's going to pick those up. But there's also going to be games when he gets 0 or 1. And price is up a fair bit on FanDuel and 6K on DK. I want to say I would probably go back to Bojan, which is sort of non-intuitive because, again, Bojan just had the big game too. But so let's move on to the third game since it's already 6:40. And I said this is the game I like the most. So, yeah, Lillard is appropriately priced both sides. McCollum's appropriately priced on FanDuel, a little too cheap on DK. $6,900 CJ McCollum, I presume, will be in our top 5 or 6 owned guys. That's a pretty good price. No, He's like our 18th owned guy right now at 20%. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I really like this matchup for CJ McCollum. At the beginning, before all the series started, I did average fantasy points per game per player that I expected out of guys, and he was a little short of the DeRozan, Bledsoe, Lou Williams. All those guys were in that 41, 42 point range, but I had CJ McCollum in the 36, 37, and $6,900. That still feels just fine on a day like today when it doesn't feel like it's going to be super high scoring. So, like McCollum most on DK by any sort of point per dollar metric. And as Kenner at 7,300 and 6,500 is going to be lower owned than he should be. I would overweight that in tournaments pretty clearly. Thoughts on Norman Powell in a DK GPP? I think he is playable. I don't think I ranked him. I do think I cut him. You can check my rankings. I would rather Rodney Hood for previously mentioned reasons in a similar price category, but he's obviously on that peripheral area of playable. It's going to correlate strongly with that game blowing out, so I'm happy if he's your only guy in that game. I'm going to like him more. Still like Mo Harkless on DK at $4,500. There was big foul trouble in the one game where he had the 5 personal fouls, so he played less, but they want him to play 30, 32 minutes. I want to play guys from this game. He is the cheapest guy on this team that I get 30 minutes of for $4,500 on DK. So, Aminu, absolutely fine to play. FanDuel, I'd rather get him in there. Again, different position than Harkless. DK, it's basically a tie for me. I like Aminu a little more. He costs $400 more. Lobster. But I really like this team. I don't want to play anyone on the bench but Rodney Hood. You can play Seth Curry. You can play Evan Turner. I generally don't want to play those guys. But I'm fine with any of these starters. Lillard, McCollum, Harkless, Aminu, Cantor, or Hood. I like all those plays. Not because they're great plays, but relative to the Drek in the first couple games. I'm trying to get in overweight on this game. Looking at the Thunder, I think you can absolutely play Terrence Ferguson. He is capable of getting 20, 25 fantasy points in his 35 minutes if he gets the giant plethora of time there. Obviously, don't play him with Dennis Schroeder. They're most immediately negatively correlated. Fine if you go with him over Rodney Hood. I have them very similar. Probably slightly prefer him because I want this game over Norman Powell, though, Norman Powell, if you're playing no one else in that game, you're also buying some correlation with. I'm not playing, Vooch, and I'm not playing Lowry, and I'm not playing Kawhi, so I'm already prognosticating an outcome in that game, so I'll play a guy from the bench in that game. I like, obviously, correlating that. I slightly prefer George to Westbrook. I'm not surprised in any way if Westbrook scores 75 tonight and George only scores 47, but still at their prices, still how I project them out in this series. George is simply a better play for me. At the start of the series, I had George getting on average about 46. I had Westbrook on average getting about 53. That's still going to be George for me at these prices every day, especially, and that would tilt more when the value is shit, and I think we can agree. The value is shit. And small forward on FanDuel, and it's just I'm slightly higher on Paul George, but again, doing that whole point per dollar thing ends up being very, very, it's decimals. It's not that different. I like Steven Adams quite a bit. Again, I have him averaging more than 30 the entire series. He's $5,900 on DK. He's one of the few guys today you're like, yeah, he's in there with CJ McCollum. Like, wow, this guy's actually priced fairly well. Most of the time, he's probably not going to disappoint me. That's not a lot of guys tonight. So 5,900, really like. 6,900, totally fine with. I wish he was healthy. Like, he is clearly not healthy. Half this team is not healthy. If I had a concern, by the way, for CJ McCollum discussing this game for a little bit, is I would not be shocked if Paul George started guarding him. They have been very reluctant in the first 2 games to have him move up onto McCollum. And he is one of the top 3 defensive players in the league. He's a defensive player of the year candidate, and they're wasting him walking around with Mo Harkless and walking around with Al-Farouq Aminu most of the time he's actually on. I would not be surprised. Again, I'm not an NBA coach. This obviously creates some size mismatches that you lose something by gaining that, but Yeah, this is a team that has three guys that can do any sort of offensive damage. You have Steven Adams. He can sit on Cantor and do at least a decent job most of the time. Cool. Westbrook will cover Lillard. Yeah, take your best defensive player, one of the best, few defensive guys on the planet, and stick him out there on CJ McCollum. He's easily fast enough. Neuter one of their guys. Make Mo Harkless or Al-Farouq Aminu beat you. Is what I would do. I don't know if they'll do it, but I'm interested to watch the game and see if Terry Stotts has any such thoughts. Again, I'm fine with Dennis Schroeder on DK. I really like him on FanDuel. I will be ready to eat those words in approximately 5 hours. Thoughts, questions, things. I can't think of anything else. I'm looking at my notes. Minor stuff about benches. All right, so let me burn through questions. Boom, 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 boom. Turner and Harkless or Gasol and Aminu on DK. I thought you meant Evan Turner. I'm like, that doesn't add up. You need Miles Turner. On DK, I would barely play Gasol and Aminu because of the scoring. On FanDuel, the same players, I would actually end up on Turner and Harkless. But Gasol and Aminu, but again, it's a hair difference, whatever makes you happy. Yahoo Cash, MCW, or Wesley Matthews? I still think I have to Wesley Matthews. MCW is a much more productive fantasy player, but not when you're talking about, I think I have him projected at 31 and 18 minutes, respectively. I still have to Wes Matthews. I already did that thing. On DK GPP, do you prefer Kawhi or Pascal in one lineup, taking into account the $900 in savings? If I was just playing on DK, because again, one way in which, that's an abstraction. I won't bother going into that. Due to the matchups and how it works with Isaac and Gordon, even at those prices, let me take a look at the ownership. This is going to largely inform this decision. Jesus Christ, we have Danny Green at 34% again. Will people not learn? Yeah, I think if I'm just playing on DK, I probably prefer playing Pascal. Just because he will be about 10% lower owned. I would probably prefer to play Pascal and save the money. But obviously it is an extremely close differentiation there. Thoughts on Sabonis on FanDuel? Playable. How come there's no longer salaries listed in the rankings for FC? I don't know. Why do you like Horford so much? I don't like Horford so much. I like Horford at his ownership. I would want to have a little more than is out there because he's coming off a bad game, and I don't think people go to him and we haven't caught the good Horford game yet, and it's not a spot where you catch a ton of good Horford games. Miles Turner is a very adequate defender. There are just better spots to attack this defense, so I don't think you get a big Horford game 1 out of 3 games. I think you get a big Horford game 1 out of 5 games, and obviously we're rounding a lot with big Horford game and 1 out of 5. But it's still in play, and I just think relative to the ownership, the price on FanDuel especially is down a little bit to $6,700. I kind of like going there. Again, I'd rather play Miles Turner in a tournament. I'd probably rather play Steven Adams, but I'd have some. Thoughts on Sabonis on FanDuel? Playable. Any cheap punts under 3.5 GPP for DK? Again, my favorite right now is Rodney Hood. It makes my ass hurt. You can Terrence Ferguson. There's a couple other guys. None of it is pretty. We did that. Tatum, roughly 20th highest owned guy in the slate. Does that change your mind at all? Obviously, I'm going to like him more the less he is owned. But he's fine. I'm thoroughly ambivalent. I have him projected for just about 30 fantasy points on the nose, which isn't great. The last game was, sort of a ceiling game for him. And he's losing potentially extra Baines minutes, potentially Horford usage from being a little bit ill. It's okay. I guess there's a shot you get 40 again, but I just think I'm going to get 28, 31, 32, and I don't really want to spend his price. And, the 50 out of him is much, much less likely than a lot of the other guys we're talking about. So, I don't have a problem playing Tatum. I don't think it's objectively a bad play, but just, I think I'm a little more likely to spike the upside with Sabonis or even Thad. So, I'm a little more inclined towards those guys. How many players would do that? We did that. Isaac or Harkless on FanDuel. Isaac if he's my only guy on that team. Otherwise Harkless. Did that. Cantor or Adams on Yahoo, same price. Both with Yahoo center pricing if I have a feeling. I don't know because it's based on ownership, and I can't guess, and I haven't looked at Yahoo today, so I won't throw at that. I will say I have Cantor projected a little bit higher. So, could you have Matthew and Hood in the same lineup? I'm going to assume that's Matthews, and I can't imagine why you wouldn't. They're not even in the same game. Are you crazy for locking 2 players tonight on DK, GPP, MME? One player is small forward, power forward, the other is a center. Well, it's going to depend who they are. If the small forward, power forward is Wes Iwundu and the center is Kyle O'Quinn, then yeah, I think it would be a bad idea to lock those players in 150 lineups. Pascal, Grant, and Turner, or Thad, Ibaka, and Cantor on FanDuel for tourneys. I'd play Pascal, Grant, and Turner. It's pretty close. I don't really want to Ibaka. Some of his time in the last game was an artifact of the blowout. I think he's likely to play, in the 20-22 minute range again. He's still just, the price isn't low enough yet. Gordon or Young, complicated. There's a lot going on there. I would probably have more Aaron Gordon in general, but that's very close. Portland used 3 different big lineups with Cantor, Myers, and Collins. Is this something we're going to see, or is because it was Cantor's hand injury? It was because of Cantor's hand injury. If you're going against Cantor, you play Collins. He's just going to be... He makes threes, blocks better. He's just going to be better than Myers Leonard. So you can play Zach Collins. You probably need some weird shit. Like you can get 22 fantasy points in 14 minutes out of Zach Collins. He can have that game. But you're basically hedging against Cantor and hoping he gets hurt, twist an ankle, foul trouble, whatever the hell. But Zach Collins is the guy you want to go with there. You don't want to play Myers Leonard. 6 players from the OKC game too much on FanDuel? No. Thoughts of Tyreek on DK? On the edge of playable. Obviously, the lineup isn't great. I still have him for 18 minutes. Really hard to imagine him getting there, but the position is shit, and it's FanDuel, so... Oh, no, you said on DK? I don't want to. Thoughts on Bogdanovich? I like him quite a bit. Isaac or Marcus Morris? If I have any Magic or Celtics players, the other one. If neither of those are a factor, I'd probably play Marcus Morris. The locks are Paul George and Cantor. I don't have a problem. You are taking a risk, but I really like Paul George at his price. Hard to imagine he disappoints you here. A couple more days to be healthy, so $8,700. Cantor, I think, is a supreme tournament play. And I'm not surprised at all to see 47 out of him today. But he is a little bit injured, and there's a chance he gets 20, and he fucks your whole day. So I love locking in a guy who I want to be overweight on. But you're risking your whole day. If you're comfortable, if you're risking $200, and you're comfortable losing all $200 the 40% of the time that Cantor is bad, yeah, go ahead. I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's crazy whatsoever. I think it is a smart play at times. When you go, you know what? Dennis Schroeder should be owned 25% tonight. He's going to be owned 6%. 100%. Just locking it the hell in. Greg Monroe should be owned 50% tonight. He's going to be owned 17%. Locking it the hell in. So it generally feels better when the guy is cheaper and we can, it's not like Enes Kanter's $3,100. But no, I don't think it's crazy. But obviously you're taking a strong stance. Can you punt center on FanDuel today? Yes. Danny Green, and especially with the shitty value, it gives you some differentiation. The centers can obviously fail. I'm absolutely fine with punting it. Danny Green and Wes Matt, or Jalen and Ferg. Whoa, the world we live in. Oh, it hurts. It hurts. Give me Danny Green and Wes Matthews. Do you play Collison or Fournier with their ownership being above 50% on a FanDuel GPP? Fournier is, I guess he's $5,100. Do I play Collison or Fournier? Collison or Fournier. The FanDuel lineup I built, obviously, quite some time ago, and I might have changed it by now, currently has Collison and not Fournier. It has Schroeder and Ross at the shooting guard position. I like that a lot. You're paying up a little more for Terrence Ross, but there's obviously an upside there. There's obviously immediate leverage against a very chalky Fournier. So... that's what I happen to do. You don't have to play either of them. There's nothing wrong with playing both of them. Sorry that I can't invent a stronger take there. Yahoo Cash, Wesley Matthews, Isaac, and PG-13 or Kawhi, Aminu, and DJ Augustine when you already have Siakam. Okay, very, very, very well asked. I would play Kawhi Aminu and DJ Augustine, but again, you're talking about a point difference there. Irving or George on FanDuel? I'm assuming you have equivalent punch or throwing away opposite. If you do not have Westbrook, I'm just going to take Paul George there. PG-13 and Cantor, you're most owned at 60%, and you're spread out today. Set up the vinegar and the insects. You know you like Hood over Matthews, but Corey Joseph or Hood, I'm fine playing Corey Joseph. I don't like Rodney Hood. I'm fine playing Corey Joseph. He's probably going to play 20 minutes and get you 15 fantasy points. I like the potential for the upside out of Hood in that game a little more. I think it is more likely Rodney Hood gets you over 30 fantasy points and under 10 fantasy points tonight than Corey Joseph. Put it that way. Kawhi, McCollum, Aminu, or Siakam, Baines, Lillard, DK in a GPP. I don't have a Celtics lineup yet, so I will take Kawhi, McCollum, and Aminu. I think there is some chance Baines doesn't start. I really want Baines news, and in 30 seconds I'm going to go look for that 100% of the time. Would you run Lillard, McCollum, and Cantor in the same one lineup on DK in a GPP? I think it's fine. I'm not trying to do it. I think having two is just fine. I think that is probably actually net positively correlated. Because the game is so good, and because there's always positive correlation having players in the same game, some positive correlation. There's also negative correlation having players in the same game. The second one is probably better than the first. As in, when you add the second one, it probably augments the value of both. The third probably, more often than not, will negatively affect the value of the other two. But that lineup is fine. Obviously, run it back with some thunder. One of, I presume, Westbrook, or if not, George, and hope that the other two games go to shit. But yes, you could certainly get a game, and we game one, you got, whatever, 48 out of Lillard, 40 out of McCollum, 50 out of Cantor. Like, it can happen. Bain starting, we still don't know. Ross and Isaac together on a lineup makes sense. It's absolutely fine at their prices. Thoughts on Jeremy Grant? I like him. A little more of a cash game play for me. Sorry I didn't specifically mention him. Powell, pivot off Hood on DK, same price. Thoughts? Yeah, I think he's great. He correlates well with the blowout. Try not to run, starters from that game if you're going to run those guys. Okay, I'm going into full looking for news mode here. So I apologize if there are late questions or things I don't get to. If anyone sees perhaps a Celtics lineup or anything else. Please throw it at me immediately. Nate McMillan is talking about trapping Kyrie a little bit. So that is relevant. They're going to throw a little more defense at Kyrie. You should be a little happier with your Horford shares, a little happier with your Tatum shares, a little more nervous about your Kyrie shares. Wouldn't change a ton if you have Kyrie projected from 50. The news that they're definitely thinking about trapping him would change my projection to a 49. But relevant if you're on the tiebreaker point here. Aminu or Isaac on DK GPP. Most of the time it would be Aminu. Certainly it's going to be Aminu if I have another member of the Magic for me. Give me some damn news, come on. I want to make my people some money. Give us a flea. Help a brother out. Not looking like any overlay of relevance on DraftKings, unfortunately. And FanDuel, not really either. No news, no news, no news. Well, let's get some ownership. Yeah, one of those days where, like, I wish I had more to say. I don't like inventing shit, and I don't like being, you must play this guy, and there are some of I like most people who tout. Like, I like them. I like them as human beings. We have a lot in common. There's a lot of manufactured conflict in the DFS space and in the Twitter space where like everyone's out there to hate someone and but most of us are, pasty white dudes who like sports and like math, and like I just have so much in common with these guys. It always seems like a thing to make it up. But some of the people I can't take are the people who run their gimmick or their personality and people who do anything rather than provide quality information. People who are unwilling to say I don't know because they're not willing to look bad. People who won't say, oh shit, I got that wrong. People are more concerned with hosting a show. Like I really think you have to respect that you are telling people what to do with their money, and not everyone has a lot of money, and you're talking about real, pardon my language, fucking money. Respect that. And most people do. I'm talking about a small minority. But there's like 10% of people like I can't stand because they don't put in the work or they don't whatever. Pascal Siakam is 16% on FanDuel. That's brilliant. Am I looking at the right tournament? Yeah, 300K. Pascal Siakam is 16% on FanDuel. That's really exciting. I'm excited about that. I'm excited to be a part of it. Terrence Ross, 21%. Kyle Lowry, 23%. That feels pretty good. DJ Augustine, 15. Kawhi Leonard, 39. Yep. Marc Gasol, 14. That feels pretty good. I'd be pretty happy if I had Marc Gasol at that number. Kem Birch, 7. Yep. Droppable. One of the reasons I like the FanDuel product is the fact you can do that. Danny Green, 25. Jonathan Isaac, 24. And it's not like Danny Green can't get there. I repeat, Danny Green scored 50 against the Magic once this year. I don't know if Kawhi played that game. Doesn't really matter. But, it's not like it's a dead play. Norman Powell, 5% on FanDuel. It's just fine on FanDuel. Fournier, 38. Yeah, so Fournier, 38. Ross, 21. Yep, Ross was the guy you want there. Looking for basically some Vooch at this point. Someone with a Vooch. Can I get a Vooch? There's a Vooch. 17 on FanDuel at $8,700. Makes me think we went over on his... what did we have him projected there? I would have thought a little higher than that, but I could be wrong. Let's see. In reality, 17%. Our world-class projections. Had him at 27. We don't get a lot wrong, but that's wrong. If Baines is announced starting, would you rather him and... The answer to that is probably yes. It sucks. Because obviously it can go wrong. It just went wrong twice in a row. But, again, the value is just dreadful. So he's like $3,800 on DK. Be really conservative with his projection. You know what I'm saying? I think you can safely call him a point per minute guy. That's less than his average over any period of time other than the last 2 games. I'm not shocked to see 24 minutes out of the dude. I don't know. Just in this unique environment, it sucks to, be pulling and advocate. One of the things I don't like about my job is I routinely have to say, please play this guy who I really don't like. If Baines is announced starting, would you rather have Baines and Lillard or Adams and McCollum? I objectively like Adams and McCollum a good bit more. $6,900 McCollum and $5,900 Steven Adams are 2 plays I'm very fond of. I think you get 35 more than 35 on average out of McCollum. I think you get more than 30 on average out of Adams for 59 and 69. Those are very good plays. Points per dollar, that is going to be better for me than Baines and Lillard. But depending on when that Celtics lineup comes out, if they announce Baines is starting at 8 for that 8:30 lock, and so you get Baines at 7% owned or 6% owned, I probably take the 7 or 8 points less projected and play the Baines side. But you've been warned, and be gentle with your hate speech at me should that not go well. Let me take a look at some ownership on DK. What is this shit? Baseball! Jesus Christ. God, my eyes, they're burning. Baseball. Jesus. Oh my God, I'm getting flashbacks of BABIP and XFIP and other acronyms that haunt my dreams. Okay, basketball. Whew, that was scary. I need some therapy. Probably need some therapy anyway. $350,000 fadeaway on DraftKings. Mana. Phenomena. Do 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 do. Phenomena. Do 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 do. Phenomena. Do 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 do. Phenomena. All right, ownership numero uno. These numbers all feel pretty good. Kawhi Leonard, 30. I mean, I'd feel pretty. These first couple names, I feel pretty good about. After that, Kawhi Leonard, 30. That feels pretty good. I like that at 30. $6,200 Aaron Gordon, 29. Yeah, that feels pretty good. I like that. 23% Danny Green. 22% Terrence Ferguson. How bad is value today? Danny Green and Terrence Ferguson are the third and fourth highest owned players. That can't be Terrence Ferguson. It's Terrence Ross. It's funny. I just saw TERR, and then I'm like, wait a minute. It's one game, and the Thunder aren't playing. So before anyone stopped me there. Okay, so let's try that again. 23% Danny Green. Scary face. 22% Terrence Ross. Okay, cool. 22% John Isaac. 22% here. Players who cost players owned between 21.3 and 22.5%. Danny Green, Terrence Ross, Jonathan Isaac, Kyle Lowry, Nick Vucevic, Marcus all those guys. So yeah, as I said, I was pretty sure all day Vooch would not be as owned as people expected him to be, and at this number, I'd be much more comfortable with it. Our projection was bad there, 21.6%. Vooch is fine at $7,800. There is some sort of upside you can obviously get to there. There's a long history with Horford and the Celtics, and it's just not good for him. But again, it's 40 does not shock me, and that may work out just fine at $7,800. But again, Danny Green. So all these guys, 22% basically. Danny Green, not happy. Terrence Ross, I'm happy. Jonathan Isaac, that's about right. Kyle Lowry, that's about right. Vooch. Yeah, it's about right. Marcus All. Okay. Evan Fournier, we can now go down to 17%. That's fine. Pascal Siakam again, 15.6. Yeah, Siakam on both sides, in my opinion and estimation, under-owned. DJ Augustine, 12.5. I'd have less. Michael Carter-Williams, 10%. I get it, but I'd have less. Fred VanVleet, 6.5. Boy, that's a statement right there. Kem Birch, 4. Serge Ibaka. Would you like some espresso? I make it with a little lemon twist. Serge. Norman Powell, 2.4%. Part of my shtick is I do 35-year-old movies. I find that it's important to make jokes that approximately 2% of your audience gets. Keeps you fresh and topical. Kem Birch, 4%. Serge, 3.5. Norman Powell, 2.5. Pat McCaw, 0.35. Yeah, that's happening. That would be correlated with a blowout, too. Wes Iwundu, 0.14. Jeremy Lin, 0.12. Jerian Grant, 0.10. Malcolm Miller, 0.01. Eric Moreland, 0.01. Melvin Frazier, 0.01. Emile Jefferson, I don't know if he's actually active. But because I do not know, the game must continue. 0.01. Chris Boucher, 0.00. Congratulations, you played yourself actually inactive, not active for the team today. Shout out for the singular shares of Jody Meeks, active. Troy Cowpain, I believe that is pronounced, for the Magic. I do not think actually active on the roster currently. And OG Anunoby, 0.00. I think still out with his head issues. I presume. If he's in and I missed that, that's a very relevant part of the rotation, and that would be pretty shitty on my part. So I'm presuming Anunoby is out, and someone please immediately correctly and dress me down. Where is your Rodney Hood at? He is in the third game, for which I do not have ownership yet. If I could get ownership 2.5 hours before the game starts, I was going to say I'd be really good at my job, but actually I would quit my job and make millions of dollars. So there it is. Bojan or Thad Young in a DK GPP. I slightly prefer Bojan. I feel like my odds of an upside are a little bit higher. Like, you need one of those crazy, you just need the Derek White game last night. You need the high shots, 21 shots, and make 15 of them and shit like that. Like, I don't think either of them are likely, but I think it's a little more likely out of Bojan to give me 50. Toronto are running Ross off the line. I'd be surprised if he gets it more than 10 shots. Yeah, they're pretty good at guarding the 3-point line. I think through the first 2 games he has 10 and 11. I believe are the numbers. I'm top of my heading it. You can check me. So I would take the over on more than 10, but not by a ton. I think you're in the right ballpark. 2 lineup changes you'd expect to see Saturday. Malik Beasley over Will Barton. Karis LeVert ahead of Carroll or Kurucs. Justin Fan just tweeted this. Do you agree or disagree? Well, first of all, let me say Justin Fan, a very, very smart guy. I value his opinion highly. I actually talked about Malik Beasley over Will Barton before the last game. It didn't happen. But lost in, obviously, the shuffle last night of Durant putting his thing down. Karis LeVert having his big game. Derek White having the best game of his career. Just a brilliant game, by the way. Shot 70% from the field. Steals, blocks, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. So just an amazing game out of him, for which he gets all the credit. Was also the fact that I was heavy on Malik Beasley, gave him like 3 mentions, and he, for $3,900, got you 35 on FanDuel at 2% owned. That went pretty good, too. I do not think there is any chance that Karis LeVert starts. I think Dinwiddie would start before LeVert, and I don't think they change up this lineup. Kenny has been recalcitrant, reluctant, disinclined towards making changes of that nature in the past, and tends to go strong with this bench unit. So Beasley over Barton wouldn't surprise me at all. I thought I might see it before the last game. I don't think they would move LeVert. I think they would move Dinwiddie if they would do that. But starting Dinwiddie or LeVert, doesn't really matter. And moving Damari Carroll down to the 4 is something you can get away from in this lineup. You can have Damari Carroll guard Tobias Harris, for example. That works just fine. So, yeah, I think that would be better for the team. They're definitely not, I think, using their minutes ideally, especially in a playoff situation. Like, I like Rodion Kurucs as a player. He shouldn't be playing in the playoffs. It's also worth pointing out that Ed Davis is out or doubtful, or I have reason to believe he's not going to play in the next game. I can't recall the exact news. But that's going to open things up, a little bit there as well. So the Nets will be really interesting going forward. Russell Westbrook over under 58 points. Real points, I'll take the under. Fantasy points, I will take the under. That's much more hesitant. Thoughts on Adams and utility and Canner in center spot and DK line. That is what I have. Joe Harris killed them last game with that defense. Awful D and took 2 shots. Yeah, I would bench Joe Harris before I benched Kurucs. I think I like Joe Harris as a player. They just can't hide him enough. There's just too many. When you deal with a team that is as well-rounded and has as many good offensive weapons as Philadelphia, it's really hard to play Joe Harris. You can play Joe Harris against Oklahoma City. He guards Terrence Ferguson. You switch everything off of him, you can live. And then, being the best 3-point shooter in the league, that works great. It's very similar with J.J. Redick. If you were playing a mirror match between the 76ers and the 76ers, you should both not start J.J. Redick because he's going to get fucked up. But yeah, I certainly would not have an issue with them benching Joe Harris. It's a real issue. Now, it's less of an issue with Embiid out. But still, obviously Greg Monroe has some game on him. Be really interesting to see what the prices are on Moose tomorrow. That's Greg Monroe's nickname, by the way. He's been so out of fantasy for a while. I tweeted a picture of a moose, and 4 people were like, "Why did you tweet a picture of a moose?" No one remembers. Greg Monroe. Nowadays, everybody want to talk like they got something to say, but nothing comes out when they move their lips. Just a bunch of gibberish. They forgot about Greg fucking Monroe. Okay, that's it, everybody. I am done. It's 7:15. Moose was pretty bad on D2. Yes, he was, and the best part was they kept giving him time, and I really thought they were going to bench him because he was so thoroughly disinterested. Just like, yo, nice shot, Joe. He just was really not interested in playing defense, but worked out. Worked out, bro. What can you do? One more thing that's really interesting. I was speaking with someone about playoff seeding today. And a lot of people are like, why, if you were the Rockets, would you not land at a higher seed? Because they made a couple decisions that made it possible that they would end up at the 4 seed and have to play Golden State, presumably, in the second round. The one very big advantage is you want as few games as possible before you play Golden State because there's less of a chance Chris Paul's leg falls off. I know it sounds dumb, but if Chris Paul is 100%, they're somewhere in the neighborhood of getting towards 50-50 to beat Golden State. It at least would not surprise me at all. But I'd probably put them somewhere around 40-60. But they have a very, very good shot with Chris Paul against Golden State. If Chris Paul gets hurt, yeah, that's not going to happen. Sorry. You can get close still. Very good team. But your odds go way down. So lost in the frequent discussion about, boy, Houston was so stupid to end up here, and then the weird stuff with Portland and Sacramento and resting the starters. Like, the last couple days of the Western Conference would make a fascinating, like, oral essay or, 5-page article I should write. But, yeah, the one upside, if you're the Rockets, is, you know what? Let's beat Utah in 5 games. Give Chris Paul a week to rest, and then God forbid he can play 35 minutes a game against Golden State and keep his leg together for 7 games and we can get that done. And then, he can rest the Western Conference Finals, which will be much easier than the semi. And he'll be fresh for the finals against the Bucks or whatever. So, interesting thing there. I am done. Thank you as always for your attention. Bonne chance, mes amis.